The Agile Shawl, a basic recipe by Joy Wingert. This shawl is a pocket shawl that is made in 3 pieces and they are combined with no sewing. This pocket shawl you can see here is made in a granny square style. This particular one is made out of Caron latte cakes, 2 cakes worth, plus a little extra for this one. It's a little wider and a little longer than this one, which is done in a moss stitch, crochet, single crochet 1, chain 1 style. What you're going to need to make this shawl is a section of yarn, about 1,000 yards maybe. I used 2 cakes of latte cakes for each of those. I've made other ones that have been one of the 1 pound of yarn by Caron. I've used 3 skeins of red heart. I've used a variety of odds and ends, and I think I've made one with 3 skeins of mix. Plus you'll need a crochet hook, and you'll want to also have some clips to hold your pockets on as you're sewing. To measure the distance you'll need, we're going to first do pocket placement. We need an approximate length of the shawl from the bottom of one pocket to the bottom of the other. Either measure from where you want the bottom of your pocket to be, up around your shoulders, and up to the middle of your neck. Double that, and then, or we're going to assume that you want your pockets to go from fingertip to fingertip. So you're going to hold your measuring tape in one hand with your thumb and your forefinger, take it around your back, across your shoulders, and hold it in the other thumb and forefinger and extend them out completely in front of you, almost like you're being Frankenstein, and then use that distance. The next measurement we're going to want is your overall length of your shawl, and that I've taken from other shawls that I have, other rectangular shawls that I've made, and that will help us figure out how many extra rows or rounds to add at the end. Off with a gray, and we're going to be doing each iteration in a different color for our example today. So I'm going to start off with this dark gray, and I'm going to work in a white and a soft gray as well. This is going to be our pocket gauge. So we're going to make a magic square. I'm doing this as a basic granny. I'm going to pull this through. I'm going to do my chain 3. Three, single crochet, or chain stitch, sorry, double, 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 chain, and our 3 doubles again. We have 1, 2, 3, and this is our 4th set. Tighten that up. We'll put that end in just a moment. And we're going to put in our chain at the top here. Chain 3 and go back the other direction. I'm actually going to do what I usually do, which is work over top of this stitch. So I'm going to work this in so we don't have to worry too much about anchoring it later. And I'm going to do my granny in the normal way. Now I don't put any extra spaces between my clusters when I go in the round, so I'm going to pause here, and then I'm going to go into my next one. Now, if you prefer, you can of course do two chains at the corners, a chain between each of your clusters, whatever is your preference based on the way that you prefer to do your grannies. And of course, you don't want to sit here and watch me make an entire granny square. So I'm going to pause and come back when I have 8 rounds and 2 squares. So I'm going to continue this up for 8 rounds, and then I'm going to do 2 of them. So we have our 2 pockets. These are each about 8 inches. And now we need to do some math. We're going to figure out how long our chain needs to be for the center of the shawl itself. So these are going to be our 2 pockets. They're going to happen on each end of this internal shawl piece. So as if you remember from our beginning, we have 3 main sections: the pockets, the main scarf part of the shawl, so the main center of the shawl, and then we have our border that's going to go around the whole thing, our border, and that's going to bring us to our final length and width. So we're not worrying about our final length and width. We're worried about, when we measured, that bottom of pocket all the way around to the bottom of the pocket as we went over our shoulders. For me, that's 48 inches from bottom of the pocket up and around my shoulders and back down to the bottom of the other pocket. Each of these squares are 8 inches. So I need my center chain to go from the center of one pocket to the center of the other pocket. So on each end, I need to remove half from my length, half of my pocket. So I'm going to be getting rid of 4 inches on each side, which is 8 inches total. I have a 48-inch shawl, shawl length that I was working on for these pockets, and that's going to give me 40 inches that I need to make my chain, more or less. Again, we're not going to worry about being too particular. Now, I know that this is about an 8-inch square, and I know that's 3 of these per 8-inch per cluster, and there's 8 of them down the side. So there's 24 in 8 inches. I need to go 40 inches. That's 8 times 5, so 5 times 32, 24. 5 times 24 is going to give me about what I need to chain in my big starting chain. A few things about your starting chain. You're going to have a lot of possibilities here to make that starting chain, because your goal is to make our first round equal this same middle piece. You're going to need this to be made up by something. So you need to have this much width. This the width here is what we're aiming for. So we either want to go directly around our chain and crochet directly into our chain in clusters, skipping 2 into our chain into 2, or we could do a single crochet the whole thing, and then we could go back around it, which is what I'm going to do. And I find that gives me the most coverage. I like my granny squares to have some holes, but not a ton. If you prefer a holier looking or a more open and airy granny square, you'll want to do this a little differently. But my suggestion is don't think too much about it. In the end, it's not going to make a ton of difference in the wearability of your shawl. It really is a looks issue and an ease of making your initial chain issue. So I'm going to pause for a moment. I'm going to put up some math instructions on the screen here for a moment so you can kind of get an idea how to calculate out based on your squares, what your starting chain should be. All right, now you've done all your math. And now we're going to make our chain. So I'm going to make my chain in the standard, I would consider a standard fashion. You may like to do yours in a different way. So I'm going to be doing a bunch of chain stitches. The math that I did for mine was the 24 stitches times 5 to get approximately 40 inches of chain stitch, which is 100 and I think I just did 120. It's 120 chain stitches. So we're gonna do I'm gonna do 120 chains, and then I'm going to just double crochet in those and make 120 doubles, including the corner, and then I'll do the corner, do 3 across, and then 120 back, and then 3 across, and make my end of my chain for my starting area, or my starting line up here, to make my first round. My goal is to have one cluster on each end, 2 corners, and then a line of doubles. To chain, we're going to put a loop on our hook. I do that by pulling through. You want to have your working yarn be the one that can move up and down. If you are not comfortable with chain stitch, you could also do foundation double crochets down and come back with regular double crochets. That's one way to do it. You've got a lot of options here. You could do foundation single crochet and then double crochet as your first round and use your foundation singles as that center chain. That will also work. It doesn't have, because they're not very big, it doesn't have a huge impact on the final product, so don't be afraid to give it a shot. To chain, we're going to wrap that yarn around our hook and we're going to pull it through. Now you'll see I do the hook do a lot of my work. Your mileage may vary. Do what you prefer to do. We all crochet slightly differently, so don't let my preferences dictate your actions. And of course, if you're doing a stitch other than granny square or double crochet, make the beginning chain that fits with the stitch that you're doing. And of course, you don't want to sit here and watch me chain 120, and I've already lost count, so I'm going to have to count this again in a second anyway. So I'm going to pause and come back when I have all of my chain stitches done. Now that we have our chain, it's the length we need it to be, we're going to decide how we want to go back. So again, I have a number of options. Make sure you can see this. One of the things I can do is go right into, and make sure I've added a couple extra chains. I'm going to do this. I can go right in to like the 3rd or 4th chain from the hook. I go into the back bump, double crochet, double crochet, and there I can start my end, skip 2, double, and continue that down to the other end, where I would put 3 extra on the end here. I would go 3 on this side and then 3 here, and then 3 and come back. And I'll show you that when we get to that end. Another option that you have here is, instead of going right into this, you could start out with single crochets or even slip stitches. So you could slip stitch. So you can see that. you could slip stitch or single crochet, whichever one, into our chain here and make a more hardcore foundation, and then come back with your doubles inside of this. The upside of doing something like that would be it's not going to stretch as much when we come around to the other side. So this is a really nice option, particularly if you don't like the fact that sometimes that initial chain has a big stretch and you get like almost a gap in the middle. If that's something you're trying to avoid, this is a really great way to avoid that. Because what we're going to do, and I'll show you this, I'm actually going to do it this way so you guys can see. I know you're of course not going to want to watch me slip stitch all the way down to the other end. But again, if you're using a stretchier yarn, like a cotton, or something with like some elasticity to it, this may be a really nice option. Or if you're a particularly loose crocheter, this again would be a very nice option for you to create a very tight center to your rectangular shawl. All right, we'll be back in just a second when we've gotten to the other end, so I can show you how I go back the other way. But you can already start to see how that would make a nice tight center to our project here. All right, so with the last few chains that I want to slip into. When we're done this, then we're going to start going back the other direction. Here's my last chain. Now I'm going to crochet 3 chain stitches to start my round. Now you'll see that I'm actually chaining around my tail, and that's so I don't have to weave it in quite as much later. A lot of things I do are to save time later on. Always better to make future use of life easier. So I'm going to go into this end here, and I'm going to crochet 2 more doubles, or 2 doubles to go with my chain 3. And you'll see that matches up right there. Now I'm going to chain 1, and in the same stitch I'm going to make my next double crochet. Now I could make 3 here. I'll show you what I mean. I could do this, make 3, chain 1, skip 2, and go into here and make my clusters like that. That's absolutely doable. That might be your preference. If that is, go ahead and do that. Because what that will do is very much mimic this here. This is not my preference simply because I don't like having the chain, kind of the chain section show as much in the beginning. I don't like the holes that it makes. I don't know why, I just don't. So don't feel like you have to do what I do. This is your project, your way. That's what I'm actually going to do. I'm going to not go into that same stitch. I'm actually going to go in this next one below it. I'm going to go right in here, double, and then I'm going to double my whole way down, going in to every stitch. Some of these might be tough depending on how tightly you made your chain and how tightly you did your slips on the way up. If you did it this way, do make sure you have some give. If you did the slip stitch style like I did here, make sure that you have some give so that you're not going to end up with no give at the end. We have a little give now, it'll have less give as we go because we're going to use up some of that give, that lack of tension by crocheting into it. But let's make sure when we get to the other end we still have a little bit of give. All right, I'm going to double crochet all the way down to the other end, and then I'll show you what I do when I get there. When we get to the far end here, I have my last full stitch. I'm going to chain, and I'm going to double into the end here, which might be a little rough depending how tight we made our stitches when we started. So it's the end of my chain. When I turned around, I went back the other way to slip back the other direction. So there's my 3 doubles, chain 1, and then back into the stitch right across from my last double on the other side. Everyone can see that in the video. And so there we go. Now I'm going to go back the other direction with all of my doubles. And then when I get back to the other end, I'll chain 1 and slip stitch it attached to the top of this chain here. And then I'm going to chain 3, turn it, and go back the other direction, crocheting between every 3rd stitch. And I'll show you that in just a moment. All right, down to the last few more doubles to go. I have this from my original chain stitch. I have my original end, and I'm going to crochet over that. Again, I hate putting in my ends, so I find the best way to do it without having to actually weave them in. You might call it lazy. I like to call it efficient. Okay, so there I have it. Single crochet, single chain stitch 1 there. We're going to put it in the top of that chain here. And this may be more or less fiddly depending on how tightly you've done your chains. And then we're going to pull that through. Now I'm going to 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to flip this over. Now I like to do this, I like to turn my work every round, so I don't have a right side and a wrong side. Your mileage may vary, you may not care, or you may have a different preference, in which case go ahead and keep going around the same direction, or your stitch may require that you do that. So I'm going to make my corner, and this will be the same throughout. This is our second round. Chain 1, second set of 3 in here. Even though I've gone and done straight doubles, what I'm going to do is actually find 1, 2, 3 and crochet in between those 3. Again, this is my preference. I could have done this where I skipped 2 and did my clusters like my other rounds, but I prefer to have a nice solid middle piece on my shawl. Personal preference, it's completely about me, it's a me issue. You do what works best for you. This is your shawl. That's partially why I call this a recipe rather than a pattern, because it's more like a collection of concepts. It's not so much a hard and fast set of actions. It's a set of ideas. So the first thing we're going to do here we go, is our first corner, the beginning of our second row. And you can see how there's my here. That's going to match up there. And we've begun working through that. Now I'm going to finish up the rest of this in the white, and then I'll show you how to attach the two. Okay, so I'm partway through the second round. So I wanted to come back real quick and show you what happens if you make a mistake. So I didn't have enough chains in my original one. I was 1 off or 2 off, which is no big deal. Even if this was if I wasn't gonna have a pocket in front of this, I still wouldn't worry about it. But I wanted to show you what happens if you're 2 stitches short like I was. What I'm going to do is split the difference here and have 2 and 2 instead of 3 and 3. And I'll just mimic that exact same thing on the other side, but I'll do it at the far end. So I'm not going to balance it out here. I'm going to balance it out at the other end. Or I might balance it out here. It just depends on how I feel when I get around the corner, especially if I go up a few stitches and I feel like it looks a little off. I'll just balance it out on the other end here. Because it's going to be behind this pocket. No one's going to see this. It's, this is right here. No one's going to see this bit. It's going to be behind my pocket. So we're not going to get worked up about this piece getting a little bit weird. That's what's really nice about any of these pocket shawls. This pocket shawl, any pocket shawl that you do, or pocket scarf, is part of your work is hidden behind the pocket. So you have a lot more leeway, a little bit more grace here to make mistakes and be off just a little bit without having to get worked up about it. I've gotten to the point on my center of my shawl, working from the center out, where I have gotten to the last of the round, and I'm going to finish up my last few clusters here. Whoop. Of course, no one's ever amazing crocheter on camera. All right, so now we've gone there. I've ended it off. The next step is to take the pocket and line it up so the same right sides are the same sides are facing forward. So I have my right side and my right side, or whatever side it ends up being. So you want the right side of your pocket facing to the right side. So whatever side is going to be the right side. If you are, I'm doing mine so that there really isn't a right or a wrong side. So I'm just deciding which side is the right side. But if you're doing a pattern like, let me try those words again. If you're doing a pattern that has a very distinct right and wrong side, for instance, if you're not turning your granny squares every round, this is a time that you want to make sure that whatever's facing forward in the open part of your shawl is the same right side as your pocket. I recommend some sort of clip. Now I'm going to use this as a clip just for an example because it's a readily available clip in my house. But I recommend clipping your pocket on, at least on the sides, so that it doesn't flop around, because this side will flop as I move around my square. So I recommend that. And a few options here. Now I'm going to do this next round in a different color because I want you to see what all the different parts look like when we're done. The important thing here is we want everything to line up with our open spots, in this case for a granny square, or you want your individual stitches to line up. If I was doing something like a moss stitch, I want my open chains to line up so that I'm going into the open chain of both of these as I'm doing my stitches. Now what I'm going to do is actually line this up with my ends. I haven't put these in yet because, as I noted before, I'm efficient or lazy, whichever you want to call it, when it comes to putting my ends, and I always do that last. So I'm going to turn my work, because that's my right side. I'm going to turn my work, and I'm going to chain around both, and I'm going to chain including my end so I don't have to put it in later. Lazy, efficient, call it what you want. Now we're going to make our granny cluster, our first 3, the chains plus 2 in that one, and then I'm actually going to push these to the inside so they get caught in my pocket. And then I'm going to skip these stitches and go right into my next hole. So anytime you're doing this with grannies or moss stitch, it's really easy because you're just going to stitch into the hole. You're just going to go through the hole in both layers. My absolute recommendation is to do this first in granny square because it's easy. It's super simple if you're comfortable with grannies, and combining them, putting them together without having to sew, becomes even easier. So now we're just going to go up the side here, and this is where a clip comes in handy. And I currently have it clipped on the other side, but if I was working this, I would have clipped all 4 of my corners to start off with. I'd actually have lined this up, especially if I was going into a situation where I wasn't going to have these nice holes to go into. But it's really, it keeps it from getting floppy. You can see this is floppy on this side. It keeps it from flopping around as we're moving our project. So even stitch markers would work. Stitch markers would work to do this, or if you have any kind of clip, clothespins would work. Bag chip clips, whatever you've got, use what you have. Safety pins, anything like that would work to do this. So our goal is just to hold this on so this square isn't flopping around, getting in our way. So our corner, we're going to work just like we would a normal corner, but again, we're working that into that corner through both thicknesses. I'm just going to keep doing that. And as we're doing this, one of the things you'll want to think about is not dropping your stitch. But other than that, you're going to want to think about how much wider you're going to want your shawl to be and how much longer. So what we're doing now is we're going to go and continue to go in rounds until it's as wide as we want it to be. But if we want additional length, then we'll need to add rows onto each end. So think about both of those things. You may like a really long shawl, or maybe you want a shawl that is wider but not as long. So maybe you're short like me and like a wide snuggly shawl, but you don't want a whole bunch of extra length. You could put a couple rounds on, even just maybe 1 round on, and then just go back and forth on your sides. Or if you want your pocket to be really forward and you want a lot of extra width after your pocket, you could just add it onto one side. So you're going to have a lot more possibilities now. This is why this is considered, I would call this an Agile shawl, because what I'm doing is iteratively updating my pattern as I go. It's more of a recipe, less of a pattern. So everyone's will look a little different. You probably don't want to sit here and watch me crochet down the edge here, so we're going to pause for a moment. And when I come back, I'll have moved all the way to the other end and be ready to start my next pocket. All right, I've got myself down to the next pocket, the second pocket. First things first, you want to make sure that you are putting your pocket on the same side as your other pocket. I've made this mistake before and it's a little annoying because then you have to go back. So you want to make sure when you put this in a straight line that both of those pockets are on the same side. So you don't end up accidentally having a pocket on one side of the shawl and then a different your pocket on the other end, on the other the wrong side of your shawl. This will be easier for those of you who are doing a right-wrong side type pattern, but for me it's a little easier because I can see that these are both the right side or the active side of the yarn that I just made here. So on this, I'm going to finish up. I have clipped my yarn onto, I pocket onto my active or my working part of my shawl, the main part of my shawl, whatever you want to call that. And I'm going to work right in. Now I am working those corners as if they are a hole in the main bit, because if I didn't, it would just be floppy. I'd have this whole spot here being floppy. I don't want it to be floppy, so I'm crocheting that down. Your design might be different. You might want to do something different there, in which case, go for it. Maybe you don't want it to necessarily be floppy, but you want to, fold that edge over. Do that. See how that looks. Try it out. I'm going to unpin that and do that. Pop it down the other end. And then finish down this end. If you're working right along with me, well done, well done. If you're watching this ahead of trying it yourself, that can be really useful. You probably know how you learn best at this point in your life, so enjoy watching me make this while you are thinking of all the amazing ways you're going to work up your shawl. So when I'm getting close to my corner, I'm going to unpin that. I'm just going to pin it over here or clip it. And I like to clip mine so that I don't get all floppy. It helps keep things stay aligned, especially if I'm working in a pattern that is not, my stitches aren't going into a hole or into a skipped area, a chain stitch location. It just makes it a lot easier to keep things lined up. I'm going to put my end here into the inside, and I'll come back and put all my ends in later. If I was doing this all the same color, I may incorporate those more into the stitches to kind of self-capture those. Self-weave them in, or weave them in as I go. I'm not really sure how you would say that. Lock them down, that's probably the best way to say it. Lock them in. This would be a great project for large groups of scraps too. Or if you're doing magic ball work, it might be nice with black pockets or white pockets, gray pockets, and then magic ball, everything else. Magic balls are simply balls made of scraps where you've attached those, generally with like a Russian join or something like that, so that it's never like a regular cake of yarn again. If you're interested, I'm happy to make a video on the making a magic ball. They're fun. But all you really need to know for that is how to do a Russian join. So here we are at our next corner, doing our 3 chain 1 3. And we're down to the last side of our second pocket, and then we're going to go all the way back down our shawl to our other side, pick up the other 1.5 sides of this pocket, and then we're going to go around, around and around. And I'll come back in just a moment when I get back down to my other pocket. All right, we're down to our last corner. Oh, this was neat for a moment. There we go. We're down to our last corner, so I'm going to bring this in. I have already counted up and matched up my corner over here, so it's easy for us to match this up. Clips and pins are our friends. I highly recommend them. And this is just a simple, cheap hair clip. So use what you got, or what's available to you. Not all of us can go out and get a whole bunch of stitch markers. Or the fancy ones that use for quilting. Those were too expensive, in my opinion. I'm sure if I quilted, I would probably have a ton of them because I'm sure they're very useful for that. But for my purposes, they were a bit much. And sometimes if you get ahead of yourself and you find that you're consistently missing stitches, just slow down and take it a little slower. Especially on this round where we're joining two layers together at spots, we want to be careful and make sure we're actually getting through both of those layers. This is particularly important, again, if you're not doing a granny, where you have these big big holes where it's easy to find the spot to put your hook, that you're being very deliberate and cautious. But knowing how to find a spot to put your hook will of course depend on the stitches you're choosing. I'm going to toss those back down inside. And then we're going to, I can get those all the way down in there so they don't poke out and annoy me while we keep moving. Then I'm going to join this back to the original stitch, top of the chain that I did. This is always fun to do while staring at a camera instead of staring at your work directly. See if I can get that in there. There we go. And I'm going to 1, 2, 3, turn and go back the other way. So I'm just going to keep doing that basic granny rectangle for, I'm going to do 3 more rounds, but this is, so now's a good time to try this on. Sorry, my battery went out before. And this is also a time to decide if you want more, do an even amount of more rounds. I'm going to add another 3 rounds over on this part in this color. Do you want, you know, another few inches all the way around? Do you want just some more width or just some more length? If you want just more width, stop now and add rows on the side, and that will give you more width. If you want just more length, add some more length here. There are lots of more ways we can work with this. We could create additional panels. We could make 2 of these, only put a pocket on one end, sew them together and make like a ruana, like that kind of, almost like a poncho. We could actually make a poncho. I'd have to think about that one a little bit, but we could probably make this into a poncho pretty easily. Then we could also make this into a vest by adding some sleeves, some side panels, a back panel, make this into a vest. I will likely be hosting a couple of crochet alongs on this over the next few weeks. Just to note, it is mid March 2020 when I'm saying this. And then I will, if there's enough interest, I'll be happy to add additional videos or break this into smaller steps. If anyone needs this in smaller steps or wants to see how we can then take this and make it into something else, like a vest, like Rowana. So thank you so much for following along. If you have questions, you can leave them in the comments below. If you do make this shawl, please tag me on Instagram or use the hashtag Agile Shawl or Agile Shawl 2020 so that I can see what you have made. Thank you all for joining me. I appreciate your time. Have a great day and happy stitching.